we all have our own stuff going on. Same way you have your own stuff going on, other people have their stuff. You don't know what's happening over there. Just give people the slack you would want for yourself. That's not too much to ask for.
The first person we lead is ourself. Welcome to Because This Matters, a podcast about leading from the inside out. I'm Mark Poise, and in each conversation, we explore how values take shape and become action, how people with clarity navigate change, challenge, and growth with intention. My guest today is Melissa. Melissa is an education specialist in school psychology and has been practicing for the past 17 years. She's also a mother of one who, as she puts it, has enough energy for two, and like many parents, has learned that the cliches about parenthood tend to be true. She also places a strong emphasis on maintaining and strengthening the relationships in her life. I invited Melissa onto the podcast because she happens to be one of the most thoughtful people I know. Welcome, Melissa. Thank you for joining us.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me. I'm a little nervous, but I'm happy to be here.
Oh, I'm really happy to have you. And I think our audience is in for a treat, as with each guest. But I already led with the truth of why you're here, that you're one of the most thoughtful people I know.
Thank you
And
so
having
much.
known you for quite some time, I'll just put it that way.
I think we've known each other for this whole 21st century. I think that, yeah, we've
Just
known each
about.
other since the millennium started.
So I offer that up just to say it's not a new trait. It's kind of always been there, or at least apparent to me. But now that I've told the audience a little bit about what you do, what would you say are the guiding things in your life in this phase?
Kindness, compassion, and community. And I did not mean that to be an alliteration, but that's just how it came out. Even if it's just like family and close friends and just maintaining and growing those relationships, and also just trying to, as I operate in the world, just trying to have some kindness and compassion and just trying to give people the grace that I would want for myself, just in general.
Mm. I love that it sounds like a lens that you kind of filter things through, that what you would want for yourself is what you're trying to help spread.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you think about it, especially like it's hard sometimes. We all have our own stuff going on. Same way you have your own stuff going on, other people have their stuff. You don't know what's happening over there. And again, just give people the slack you would want for yourself. That's not too much to ask for, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. It sounds like an embodiment of the ancient quote, "Be kind, everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle."
Yes. Oh, yes. And so I went to Catholic school, right, when I was little. And so you have mass every Wednesday, and there's no real Sunday school. The religious education is kind of like built into the curriculum. But one of the first things that really stuck with me was treat others the way you want to be treated, you know? And I really took that to heart from a very early age, and tried to, I remember at one point I was basically like giving away my school supplies. Right, because people would like, hey, I need a pencil. I forgot to bring a pencil or something, so I'd lend them out, and I would never get it back. And my mom's like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "Well, somebody needed a pencil, and you treat people the way you want to be treated." So, and my mom's like, "That's wonderful, but like, you don't just ask for your stuff back." And then, um, I am not a beach person. My mom is a beach person, and um, I do not like the beach. Right, from a very young age, and I remember we were we were there, and I must have been ruining my mom's vibe, because at one point my dad kind of like takes me to the side. He's like, Mel, why don't you let's just take a walk for a second. Come on, let's just go. I'm like, Dad, I don't like the beach. And he's like, I know, but your mom loves it. And sometimes you do things with other people that you may not necessarily like, but it's because they love it and it's important to spend time with each other. And that's something that kind of clicked with me, like, oh, still not a beach person, but I will go to be social.
Yeah. Well, you get a little bit of that community, it sounds like, even the family side of community with your mom.
Yeah.
One of the things that I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't call out is A lot of kids, when they're growing up, they'll hear these things. They'll
Right.
hear a parent say something like your dad did. They will have something like that impressed on them in school, like you said in your Catholic schooling. But with you, it actually registered and it stuck and it meant something, translated
Yeah.
into action.
Hmm.
Do you have any idea why?
I because I saw it in action, right? It wasn't just something that it's not just something that that my teachers would say. It's not just something my dad would say to me. I saw it in action all the time, every day. And not just between family members, but how my parents, how they are with their friends. I had it modeled for me.
Mm.
And then when I went off to university, I went off like I didn't know anybody there, and so my friends became my family while I was there. Just the people around you, they shape you, and and then putting those things into practice. It's one thing all good and well to say it, but you got to practice it.
Yeah, and I guess you're kind of calling out that it wasn't just told to you, it was shown to you.
Hmm.
And then you got to feel how it feels when it's shown to you.
Yeah.
And that's what you wanted to share is kind of what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Especially like you know, when my son came into the picture, right? And then the talk about like, okay, well, who's gonna watch him when everybody's back at work? Unfortunately, I have a lot of family around me, and my dad especially, because he was really able to like step in and be that childcare. If something comes up and he can't do it, you start going down like like the phone tree. Like, okay, well, can you watch him? Can you watch him? And I've never if somebody honestly is not able to do it, they will tell me no. Otherwise, they're like, yeah, sure, or yeah, sure, but please, don't dawdle. Come straight over and pick him up as soon as you can.
Yeah. Kindness and community. I've two of the three that you rely on as a parent. Oh my gosh, I can relate to that too.
Yeah. Like, yeah, yes. Oh, yeah. Because especially like I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but like to me, I'm like, it's like every now and again, you're like, how are you sick again? You were just sick. Why are we doing this again? But especially as they go to daycare.
I'm also curious about your work. You've shared, especially growing up in a family that shows this, how you would kind of naturally continue that. There would be that continuity of
Hmm.
action and
Yeah.
that values centric approach. But you carried it, at least on the outside, seems like you carried it into your choice of career, your area of study, your area of day to day work. Could you
Yeah.
maybe tell people how it shows up for you there?
It's kind of like the linchpin, or one of the linchpins in my work. Okay, so as a school psychologist, a lot of times, sometimes there is counseling involved, but most of the time that's left to the school counselors. So for my role, it's more about if a kid is struggling, whether it be with their academics or their behavior, they kind of call school psychs in to kind of like maybe do an assessment and see if maybe there are any special education services a child could qualify for. But you also have to be able to see things from the other person's perspective. It's part of the training. Being able to see things from where the person is coming from, or sometimes depending on what stage you are in life. Granted, nobody, like, no particular age group is a monolith, but there are certain things to look out for that you need to be mindful and sensitive of, especially like with something that counselors do. It's this thing called unconditional positive regard,
Carl
right?
Rogers. Yeah.
Yeah. So with unconditional positive regard, it's important to try and have that with a client, because how especially when you're doing like regular therapy, how else are you supposed to build that rapport? And that rapport is going to be the foundation of the relationship you set up with that person.
And unconditional positive regard is a very tall order sometimes.
Yes. Yes, especially at least in a microcosm, and for general public, especially if you're dealing with a toddler. The
Yeah.
terrible twos, the terrible fives. I learned about the terrible fives the hard way because I thought, no, it's just the twos. But then my cousin-in-law, she's like, "No, man, fives." Like, "5s?" And my son was 5 at the time, but then I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
okay."
Yeah.
And again, you don't have to be an expert in child development or anything, but you also have to kinda, like, understand, like, okay, especially, like, when they're throwing those tantrums and having those big feelings. Hey, sometimes as adults, we're still throwing tantrums and having big feelings. But it's about understanding where they're coming from, especially like with little ones. They may not necessarily have the vocabulary to identify what they're feeling, right? So you have to kind of like help them label it and help them figure out how to deal with it appropriately.
Yeah.
Because that's another adage where, that's kind of become like, kind of like hit mainstream where it's like, it's okay to feel what you feel. It's more about how to express it and process it in appropriate ways.
Yeah. I mean, you're basically planting the seeds of emotional intelligence in children,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, I love that, and it you kind of make me zoom out, and I think about one of the core through lines of this entire podcast. Something I share pretty often with people is an opinion, but I want to throw it out there and see how it shows up for you. Um,
Okay.
I often say that fulfillment comes from living your values. And I'm thinking about the fact that not only do you have these, kindness, compassion, community, this through line
Mhm.
for yourself, but you are also describing a career where you have to embody these. It's not just a nice to have or like, I can afford to get off track for a while, but get back on track. Um, I wonder, do you have any thoughts as I raise that, my personal notion that the feeling of fulfillment comes from living your values and how yours kind of have to show up everywhere?
Yeah, and I always try to kind of like maybe not necessarily compartmentalize, but kind of like put a boundary between work and personal life because you know for me like that's my work. I enjoy my work, is very fulfilling, but when I'm home, that time is for my family and for me to focus on them and having that quality time with them. Um Honestly, psychology was not my first career choice, which is funny. I was going to be a director. Thank you very much. But I applied to the film school, didn't get in. And I wasn't even upset about it at the time. So I'm like, okay, that's the sign where as much as I love movies and TV, that's not where my career path is going. Let me find something else. And so my friend was taking a gen ed psych course and she's like, the professor's really funny. It's a fun course. Come check it out with me one night. And so I went with her, just on a whim because she'd tell these stories and it just sounded so interesting. I'm like, I have to see for myself. Anyway, I really enjoyed it. And so I did my bachelor's in psychology. And then when it came time, okay, want to make a career out of this, grad school. And then that's when I went into school psychology. And I don't know, you know what? It's not like I was like, oh, I have so much compassion in me. I have to share this with the world. It's just, I just really wanted to do it. And I guess maybe I, f- because of those things showing up in my personal life, it translated well into the work field. Cause I'm sure if it was a thing where I was like, nah, man, this ain't for me, I would have quit and found something maybe during grad when I was doing the internship. But I don't know. I've never really thought about it in terms of that. It's just everything just kind of fell into place for the lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like a great many people get to benefit from that falling into place as it's played out over the years.
I hope so.
uh,
I hope so.
I wonder, do you see the notion of compassion? Do you see it as
Mhm.
something that you just have and then you share, or is it something that you cultivate?
Both. That kind of like gets into like a nature versus nurture debate,
Yeah.
you know? Um, because I feel like if if there is something like, and not just with compassion, but like just in general, right? If there's something about yourself that you do not like that you see as a flaw, right? And you want to work on it, great. If not, then just own it. Granted, if you're an absolute jerk, okay, yeah, and you're not going to change, just own being a jerk. No one's going to like you. You're going to be a little lonely, but that's it. There are sometimes where I'm not feeling so compassionate and I'm feeling like a little bit of a jerk myself or very impatient. But again, it's one of those things where it's not going to be a linear progression, right? There's going to be stops and starts. There are going to be leaps forward. You're going to backslide. So I think it's a little bit of both, where you want that for yourself, but also you have to nurture it. You have to practice it. And now you got me thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For anyone who may not be familiar, but it's very Googleable, right? Basically, what he theorized is that in order to kind of like climb the pyramid or climb the ladder to self-actualization where you've achieved all your goals and dreams, you have to get the more basic needs met first, right? So at the very bottom, you have things like food, air, water, things, survival needs, and then next phase up, shelter and security, and the next thing up, relationships, right? So my takeaway then is like, oh, so basically what he's saying is that need for relationships, for family, friendship, love, community is second to food and water and shelter, those basic survival skills. Humans on a whole were meant to live communally, right? No, if you're the kind of person where you're kind of introverted, you're like, like I'm not out there, chit chatting with the neighbors and having long conversations. That's fine, but there are people I'm sure there are family and friends in your life that you see every day, that you hang out with, that you're supporting each other, taking care of each other. That that's your community. That's it. You know, you don't have to be like the mayor of the neighborhood.
Yeah. Community is really the reason that humanity as a species has survived, and you could even say thrived. I mean, that might be relative, uh, depending on where you are in the world or the news you're paying attention to. But we're not stronger, and we're not faster, and we're not a lot of things. It's because we team up and we
Ex-
support each other.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you said like the news is like yes. In fact, I've had to start microdosing the news, if you will, just for like my sense of sanity. But yeah, we were meant to live community, whether it be like in the small C community, big C community, and people, and something that something that I learned too is that people by nature want to be helpful. Somebody were to come up to you, it's like, hey, I'm lost. Can you help me with directions? You want to be helpful. You're not going to be like, no, got my own things to do. People naturally want to be helpful. So I remember something that my mentor taught me one time is that especially like if you're with some like, and this was more particularly working with a student that was that was resistant, just being like, just flat out being like, look, you got to help me out. Just help me out with this thing.
Mm.
And sometimes that will work because I mean, granted, you have some people who are flat out like no, right? But people by nature do like being helpful.
Yeah, I like flipping the script a little bit and taking a chance um, that they might be willing to offer something instead of just taking things from every authority figure in their life. That if we invite them to offer something, it might flip the script a bit.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel yourself getting kind of out of alignment with these?
Maybe not in any major existential way, but I feel like especially during times like at work where it's like the busy schedule, right? Where it's like the busy time of year, and or sometimes if I have a lot of stuff like going on, like basically like just like a to-do list, things I'm trying to get done around the house or get done for myself. It's just sometimes I feel like a little disconnected, like I'm not getting in that quality time, especially like, and I feel it especially with my son, because like, yeah, mom guilt is real. Learned that the hard way too. But I feel like sometimes I feel like, like out like at the end of the day, I'm kind of like doing like a review and running through everything that happened in the day. And I'll start feeling like, oh man, I didn't really spend much time with my child. He was there. I mean, he was entertaining himself and I'm sure he was fine. But I just feel like this guilt, like, oh, I didn't really spend much time with him. Or like in the weekend, it's, like, oh, I really didn't get to spend much time with my husband and my kid. It was because I was just wrapped up in my own stuff. And yes, it needed to be done. And my husband is great. It's never like, well, how long are you gonna be? What time are you coming back? Anytime I tell him like, hey, I need to step out, I need to like, free range adult for a little bit. He's like, don't worry, I got it. But I still feel that guilt.
Yeah.
So I thankfully no existential crises has come up, knock on wood.
I hear inside of that you spend a lot of time reflecting naturally throughout the course of your days.
Yeah, I spend and as a kid too, I spend a lot of time in my own head, for better or worse. Um, so that happens, and then sometimes, especially if I have sometimes I gotta let things marinate before I come up with a solution or like really process something, and then I'm able to kind of like let it go. Or so or sometimes let's just call it what it is, like ruminating. Sometimes, like, for better or worse, like, I will ruminate on stuff, and then I have to obsess over it a little, and then I can let it go.
How do you cultivate compassion? Maybe not as you, but how would you say to someone else that has trouble doing that, how they might cultivate it for themselves?
Ju just get started, practice. You don't have it never has to be any sort of grand gesture, but every now and again, like, little things, like checking in with people that you care about. Like how sometimes you may have, like a dream about somebody. And then it's like, "Oh, man, that was weird." Or even if it's not weird, they just pop up in a dream and they never do. Or drop them a text, right? Even if you don't have time for a whole conversation, just drop them a text and be like, "Hey, man, how you doing?" Or like if you're out and about somewhere and somebody just kind of like pops up into your mind randomly, "Hey, man, you just ran across my mind. How you doing?"
Clearly, you do this in your life. You're one of the people that will reach out. And
Yeah.
it sounds like that's part of the way that you help to continue cultivating this for yourself as well as with others.
Yeah, I try because especially like I mean, granted, we all have social media and people will post things, and so it's easy to kind of like keep up that way in a sense, right? But also, it's kind of like sometimes it can be a little curated, a little cultivated or filtered, right? Um, but just to send a text or something very personal, like, "Hey, how are you? What's up?" Or like, "Oh man," or it's somebody's birthday. "Hey,
Yeah.
happy birthday."
Yeah. And that, I mean, gosh, that speaks to community also because
Yeah.
you're not talking about cultivating compassion by yourself off in a corner. You're always reaching out and looking outward and
I mean, just on like on a bigger scale, if there are any causes that you're really close to your heart, you feel like you want to be more involved, get involved. It doesn't have to be perfect or you're like, I have to do it in this specific way. Sometimes it's best if you just jump in, you know, just jump in and give something a try.
yeah. I love the kind of woven throughout everything you have to share. There's this sort of like openness to like see what arises from it. It's like, oh, I'm going to do this, but I'm not too fixed on some particular thing, some transactional outcome. I'm just going to see what comes out of this because this feels right or this would be generally good.
Exactly. To me, being transactional and being compassionate are antithetical to each other, right? Because if you're going to be transactional, okay, there's some things in life where, okay, it's all right to be transactional, or that's kind of like the setup, right? But if it's about showing compassion for somebody, you know, if it's about showing kindness, it's because you feel like you want to do it out of the goodness of your heart. It's not about, okay, well, now it's time for you to reciprocate, because that reciprocation may never come back. Let's be honest, right? Sometimes that may never come back, or it may not come back, show up in a way that you're expecting or thinking that it needs to be done. So it has to be because you want to do it for yourself. Also, like with my family and friends, we're not transactional with each other. So to see it elsewhere feels a little gross. Now, granted, these aren't real people, but I don't know if you've watched the show Succession.
I
I don't
haven't.
know. Okay, so that family, okay, first of all, it's a brilliant show, but that family sucks, right? Because they're so transactional with each other, right? Every little thing, they cannot have like a normal interaction with each other without it eventually becoming transactional. I'm like, you know what? If that's what being uber rich means, then I'm fine. It's okay. The money would be nice, but I would hate for all that other stuff to come with it.
Yeah, you can't buy yourself out of it. What if a listener feels like they are surrounded by too much of that transactional stuff? What advice would you give them?
I think it depends on the person, because it's hard to say like just in a general like or a hypothetical. But I think I would start talking to the person about like, okay, is this something that you're okay with? Is this something that you want to change? And if so, what would you want that change to be? Right? And then again, so you don't want to be so fixated on being goal oriented that it gets in the way of actual practice and actual doing. But you have to have, I think it's helpful to have some sort of vision in your mind of what you want for yourself, or what you want to see as kind of like an outcome state, and that can kind of help kind of like guide you into how you want to change things.
You've always had this clarity, it sounds like, since childhood because it was modeled so well for you and the community that raised you. And so it comes across as a really positive certainty, like that no matter what, I'm going to show up this way. This is important to me. This is an end in itself. What
Hmm.
are you willing to be wrong about?
You know, never ask a stubborn person that. Never ask a stubborn person that. Like, okay, so okay, so I have been told, and I have to agree, I can be stubborn, right? Um, but I feel like, especially as a teenager, right? You couldn't tell me anything, right? Not that I was crazy and rebellious, but once I had my mind fixed on something, right? I'm stubborn, I'm stuck in. As I've gotten older, I've been and become more aware of that. I've tried to not be so stubborn, not to dig in so much. Just be willing to be wrong, and being humble enough to admit, like, okay, I was wrong about that. Not that that has to completely shake your morals in any way, or completely overhaul your values in any way, and especially in a way that doesn't feel comfortable for you. As you move through the world and you meet people and you develop relationships with people who have their own experiences that shape their lives and their perceptions of the world, you kind of like have to be able to kind of like take that on and understand it. And some of the stuff you'll hear and you'll be like, okay, well now I have some more insight into how you are as a person, how you grew up, and what your personality. But sometimes you hear stuff and that and you take it on and it can help you grow as well. But the short answer is just be willing to be wrong about stuff, because nobody's right about everything all the time. And only fools think they know everything. So you have to be willing to admit when you're wrong.
Yeah. That really raises a dimension of like things that could pull you off track from kindness and from compassion and community
Hmm.
if you get entrenched being stubborn
Hmm.
in something.
Yeah.
And I feel like I sort of heard you allude to the fact that one of the first things to do is to get more context about what someone else is seeing or some other perspective on the situation rather than just inside your own mind.
Yeah, exactly. And because I mean, it's the cliche about being able to walk a mile in a person's shoes, and Granted, you don't necessarily have to, but you need to at least understand that they're coming from their own perspective. They're coming from their own life experiences, and they could be they could be radically different from yours. And they're not gonna tell you every deep dark secret about themselves or every deep personal thing about you right away. That sort of relationship takes years, right? Uh, and you need to be mindful of that. But just because something may not be a big deal to you, it may be a world to somebody else. And you have to be willing to at least acknowledge th- that that's just how human beings are. You don't have to know everything about them, but you just have to understand they're coming from a different place.
Yeah. Yeah. With your work in the field of child psychology, student psychology, is there maybe any big misconception that people have about the developmental psychology of kids and young adolescents that you would want to correct in any way as you see it?
That's a very big question. I mean, granted, like it's great now because you have all one of the best things about the information age is that, whether it be through books or the internet, granted, you still have to be very careful about your sources, right? Um, but you can learn, having access to that research that's been done on child development across the decades is kind of like at your fingertips. Um, but I would say just in general, you have to try and remember. And now, granted, this isn't some original thought. I'm kind of cribbing from Fred Rogers here. You have to kind of try to remember what life was like at that age for you and kind of tap into that. Granted, as an adult, you get older, you understand more, and, but you still have to understand that they're not at that point yet, right? And the only way they're going to get to where you are is if you make this a teaching moment, right? Because in terms of like, especially like with behavior, you know, it's not just about rewards and punishment or rewards and consequences. It's also about teaching the proper way to behave. Because sometimes with kids, it's like if you tell them, don't do that, but then they're like, okay, but then what am I supposed to actually do? And they're not sure. Right now, we as adults, we can kind of like, okay, I'm not supposed to do this. What am I supposed to do then? And we can kind of like calculate it. But when they're very young, sometimes they get stuck in that, okay, I'm not supposed to do this, but then they have a hard time coming up on their own what they're supposed to be doing. And that's when you have to kind of like step in and help them with that. And sometimes you have to be very explicit about it. And because, yeah, and this is just a general thing. When you're teaching something in general, right? Non-examples are good, right? But just as important, if not better, is the actual example. So yeah, just kind of like making that a teaching moment and just trying to help them figure out, how you want them to behave. And granted, that's very hard with teenagers,
Yeah, you need their
but
attention.
yeah, you need their attention, but also it's like, they're trying to, not like push boundaries, not necessarily in an unhealthy or inappropriate way, but like they're trying to figure out who they are. And especially as they're not little kids anymore and they're transitioning into adulthood. So you have to kind of, again, try to give them some grace to kind of like mess up, make mistakes. Like, I'm so glad camera phones and social media weren't around while we were growing up and making our mistakes. Because, it's like, if anything, that becomes a story that gets told at like the 10th high school reunion, but otherwise people forget about it. Meanwhile, stuff on the internet lives forever.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
You're reminding me just by really appealing to the value of modeling desired behavior instead of just correcting undesired
Yeah.
behavior.
And that's another thing too, the modeling, that's key. It's one thing if I tell you, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. But if I'm not modeling it, you're going to be like, first of all, especially the older ones, will be like, well, that's hypocritical. But as little ones, it's more I feel like it really hits different when they see you do it. Like, I know, like, when I'm with my son, and if there are times when I'm just feeling very impatient and I just wanna yell and have my own little tantrum and breakdown, I kinda, like, have to stop myself because I'm like, I don't want him to think that this is the way to deal with certain situations, right? I don't want him to think that this is the way to act when things don't go the way you thought they would. Because I know if he sees it, that's what he's gonna model. Like, oh, if I'm ever in this situation, mommy does XYZ, so I'm gonna do it too. No. So I have to like be very mindful. Like you think they're not watching and listening, but they're watching and listening.
Yeah. I feel like that almost creates a full circle moment because when I was exploring how your values arose, you basically said it was modeled for me and I got to receive it. So, of course, I want to give it. And then now, even from a theoretical, but also an experiential side, you're saying we have to model it. We can't just tell them about it. I feel like we've just
Yeah.
completed the circle.
Oh my god, yes. Or if you would put a nice little bow on it. Like I'm a bow girl. Like
Yeah.
it's bad. I'm one of those people who likes wrapping presents, which is maybe that's a little weird, but
It's
like
I know it can be high art. I am definitely aware of that. Allow me to paint a fictional scenario.
mhm.
You have the attention of the entire world for 30 seconds to a minute,
Oh boy.
and you can advocate for a value that you believe everyone listening would benefit from adopting more centrally for themselves. What would it be, and
Oh,
what
okay.
is your sales pitch for that value?
I mean, short answer, don't be a it's not that hard, you know? No one's asking you no one's asking you to be a saint, but like, it's like I think we could do with less in the world, you know?
So is that
Um,
an inverted let's all be kinder to each other?
yes. Yeah, and it's short and sweet. You could put it on a bumper sticker or a t-shirt. I really do feel like sometimes maybe the world would be better if everyone just operated with a little bit more compassion and kindness, especially like on like the large scale. Maybe that's a little Pollyanna-ish. But I would say, like not just kindness outwardly to others, but just kindness to yourself. Sometimes we get really down on ourselves and we don't give ourselves the grace that we give others or that we want from them. And it really is, and I know maybe we're getting to a realm now where it's kind of been like overdone, the idea of self-care, but it's true. And self-care isn't just about taking time for yourself to like relax and recharge. Part of that too, I feel, is kind of like being there for yourself, in terms of like the more mental health aspect, being kinder to yourself, taking yourself off the hook a little bit, if you will. So I guess that's my pitch. It's not much of a pitch. I'm
Yeah.
not much of a salesperson, but
Well, that's okay. That's okay. I feel like you're talking about ways that kindness shows up for you and talking about how it can show up for everybody, whether directed outward or back toward themselves and yield great benefit.
yeah, because I know, especially like sometimes, especially when I'm feeling stressed and I have a lot to do, and we all do it where you put yourself on the back burner. And then like when we do start taking care of ourselves, it's like all of a sudden we start feeling a little guilty about it. Like I should be spending this time on something else, but you have to take that time. One thing else, a little nugget of wisdom, for the lack of a better term, I want to share. I guess sometimes too, especially when you're building that compassion with others and how remember how I was saying it doesn't always come back the way you expect,
Hmm.
right? You have to be okay with that. That's something I kind of like had to learn on my own and practice on my own, where if I felt like somebody didn't show up for me the way I expected them to, or operate a certain way, or see things a certain way, or act a certain way I think they should have acted because that's how I would have acted, let it go. Because, okay, that's not how you operate, but that's how they operate.
Mm.
right? And you can either be like, okay with that, cool, we're still friends. It's not like this is a that, but I know that's how you are, and that's how I will just, I take that information moving forward. Or you're like, no, that's a deal breaker, red line for me, and you let it go. Not necessarily that you have a fight or like some sort of breakup, but get me maybe just kind of like recalibrate the dynamic.
Yeah. See people as they are, not as how we'd like to force them to be.
Exactly, exactly. And that brought a lot of peace in my life when again just took people as they are, and not expecting that, and knowing that even if a lot of people operate the way you want them to, sometimes, especially as you get older, you go into the world, you start making your friends, especially in adulthood, knowing that they're not going to always operate the way you expect them to, or the way people in your childhood did, and to just be okay with that.
Melissa, thank you so much for sharing with people about how these things show up for you in your family and in your work and in all the areas of your life. I can speak as your friend that we're better for it.
Oh, thank you.
That's all for this episode of Because This Matters. I believe that these are conversations that matter. If something from this conversation spoke to you, please consider sharing it with someone. Maybe take a moment to like, rate, follow, or subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube. You can learn more about my work as a coach and speaker at markpoise.com. Until next time, remember that a life aligned with values is a fulfilled one.